I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my cabin door like they were trying to break it down, and for a second I thought something was seriously wrong, like a fire or an emergency. But when I looked out the window, I saw flashing lights and a woman standing outside pointing at my house like she owned the place, and that is when I realized this was not an emergency. This was something else entirely, and it was about to get a lot worse. I had only bought that cabin a few weeks ago. It was quiet, surrounded by trees, the kind of place you go to escape noise and stress, and I finally had a weekend free, so I decided to spend the night there, just me, no distractions, no calls, no city noise, just peace. But instead I woke up to police cars outside my own property and a stranger acting like I was the problem. Before I opened the door, I grabbed my phone just in case, because something already felt off. When I stepped outside, one of the officers looked at me and asked if I was the one staying there. I said, "Yes, this is my cabin, I own it." And that is when the woman stepped forward, immediately cutting me off, saying, "No, he does not belong here. He broke in. I saw lights last night and I called 911. I just stood there for a second, trying to process what she was saying, because it made no sense. I told the officer again calmly, "I own this place, I can show you the documents right now," but the woman kept talking louder, saying I was lying, saying she had never seen me before, and that no one new was allowed in this community without HOA approval. That was the first time I heard it, HOA, and suddenly everything started to make sense. Before this goes further, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Karen's Stories Daily. And hit like right now, because this one gets even more intense and you do not want to miss what happens next. I turned to her and asked her calmly who she was and why she thought she could call the police on me for staying in my own cabin. She looked at me like I was the one out of line and said she was part of the HOA board, and it was her responsibility to protect the neighborhood from unauthorized people, unauthorized in my own property. I could feel the frustration building, but I kept my voice calm because the officers were still there and I knew losing control would only make things worse. I pulled out my phone and opened the purchase documents, showing my name clearly listed as the owner. I even showed them the recent transaction details. But before the officer could respond, the woman stepped in again, saying documents can be faked, and she did not trust anything I was showing. At that point, even the officer looked confused because this was clearly going too far. He asked her to step back so he could verify things properly, but she refused to back down. She kept insisting I needed to be removed immediately because I was making the neighborhood unsafe. Unsafe, just by being inside my own cabin. The officer finally asked for my ID, and I handed it over without hesitation. While he checked everything, the woman stood there watching me like she was waiting for me to slip up, like she was hoping I would say something wrong, but I did not. Because I knew I was right. And then something shifted. The second officer, who had been quiet until now, walked over to his partner and said something quietly after looking at my ID again, and then both of them looked at me differently, not confused, not suspicious, but like they suddenly understood. Something the woman did not. The officer handed my ID back and said, "Everything checks out. He is the legal owner of this property." You would think that would be the end of it, but it was not. The woman froze for a second, then shook her head and said, "No. That is not possible. I have lived here for years. I know every homeowner, and I have never seen him before, so something is wrong here." That is when I realized this was not about rules anymore. This was about control. She could not accept being wrong, so she doubled down. She demanded the officers remove me anyway, saying HOA rules required prior approval for new occupants and that I had violated community policy by staying overnight without notice. The officer looked at her and said calmly that HOA rules do not override property ownership rights, and there was no legal basis to remove me from my own home. That should have ended it, but instead she stepped even closer, pointing at me and saying, "This is not over. You cannot just show up and think you belong here." And that is when I finally spoke in a different tone. Not louder, but firmer. I told her I did not just show up. I bought this place legally. I have every right to be here. And if she had taken even a moment to verify things before calling 911, none of this would have happened. The street was quiet now, neighbors watching from a distance, the tension still hanging in the air, the officers standing between us, keeping things calm, but you could feel it, something had changed. She was no longer in control, and she knew it. But what she did next surprised even me. She said, "Fine. If you think this is over, it is not. I will make sure the HOA takes action against you. You will not stay here without following our rules." I almost laughed at that point, but I did not because I knew something she did not, something that was about to change everything. I looked at the officers, then back at her and said, "You might want to be careful about how far you take this because you still do not know who you are dealing with." And the moment those words left my mouth, her expression changed slightly, not fear, not yet, but uncertainty, because deep down she realized she might have made a very big mistake. She tried to act like nothing had changed, but I could see it in her face, that small hesitation, like she suddenly was not so sure anymore, but instead of stepping back, she crossed her arms and said it did not matter who I was, the rules still applied, and I needed HOA approval to stay there like I was some stranger and not the actual owner. I stayed calm and told her this was not about rules anymore. This was about her calling the police without checking facts and trying to force me out of my own place, and that was a serious mistake, but she just shook her head like she refused to accept it. That is when I decided to be clear. I told her I work closely with the legal system, and situations like this are not taken lightly, especially when someone makes a false complaint and wastes police time. And the moment I said that, the officers looked at me again and their expressions changed, like they finally connected everything. One of them turned to her and said, "Mom, you need to stop right now. This is not going the way you think." And she looked confused, asking what he meant and why they were suddenly serious. I told her straight that I was not just some random guy in a cabin. I understand the law and I know exactly what happens when someone crosses a line like this. And the silence that followed said everything. Her voice dropped a little as she tried to explain she was just protecting the neighborhood, but it did not sound confident anymore, and the officer reminded her that calling 911 without proper reason can lead to consequences, and she needed to be careful. For the first time, she did not argue. She just nodded slightly and stepped back. The officers finished checking everything and confirmed once again that I was the legal owner. Then they told her clearly that this situation should never have escalated like this as they left. The tension faded, and the neighbors who had been watching slowly went back inside, but you could tell everyone had seen enough to understand what really happened. She walked away quietly without saying anything else, and that was the end of it. No more accusations, no more control. I went back inside my cabin, finally able to enjoy the peace I came for, but now with a clear reminder that some people will push boundaries until they are forced to stop. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like the video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily for more real moments like this, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And do not forget to share this with someone who would not believe this actually happened.